Hello, everyone. Today we're going to discuss the exchange Slav defense to the Queen's Gambit. We'll look at uh, again the Grandmasters versus the exchange Slav, and the exchange Slav is one of those openings that are very polarizing. Some people hate it and think it's like extremely boring, especially if you play the Slav defense is black, and some people absolutely love it. Um, and this defense, a dead draw to an absolute refutation to the Slav defense. So, and of course, it's somewhere in between, but that just shows you how opinions change. Um, the latest uh, thoughts about it is that it basically, does lead to equality. Um, but it is it's not as simple as that, and that's what's deceptive about it. Because you see the symmetry in the position, it looks like a dead draw, but there's many games, strong grandmaster games, and examples, and most of them are drawers. Like I said, it leads, you know, to equality, but it's a tough game, and there's some games where grandmasters win this as white, and but for club level, it's definitely a if I was white and every now and then I would face a Slav, it's easy to play the exchange Slav. Okay, what is the exchange Slav? Let's look at it. Well, first, we have to get to the Slav defense in the Queen's Gambit. So there's our Queen's Gambit, and then C6. Okay, this denotes the Slav defense as opposed to E6, which is your Queen's Gambit declined. And notice the main difference here in the Slav is that the bishop is free to come out and not blocked in, as in the Queen's Gambit decline. Now, the downside, if there is a downside anyway, is that the natural square for the knight, which would be c6, is blocked. Okay, and if we know anything about these queen pawns opening, many times one of the major breaks we're looking for in the position is to play c5 anyway. So one might ask, well, why do I want to play c6 and then c5 later on? Isn't that just a waste of time? Well, chess is a game of give and take, and sometimes you have to make little concessions here to make gains elsewhere. And in this particular opening, you're willing to cost yourself a little bit of time so that your piece, the bishop on c8, can come out. And also, this move c6 is actually threatening, right, to actually take here. This is a legitimate threat to take here and play b5 afterward. So, for example, let's just do any kind of move here. So, say g3. You're actually threatening to keep that pawn. I just made a random move just so you can see. So there, those are the pluses and minuses of playing c6. Just a real brief sketch. But we're going to talk about the exchange variation, which takes place after c takes d5. Okay, and now what this does is it basically reduces the possibilities for black and white. So just by releasing this tension early in the position, um, it makes it easier for black to defend and reduces again the possibilities for both sides. Now this is good for players who enjoy quiet systems. Okay, they don't want to face a whole bunch of tactical tricks and such, and this kind of nips that in the bud right away. Okay, and C takes D5 also I just showed you about with D takes C4 and then supporting the pawn and all that. And there's several lines in the Slav like that. These note boom variations and Botvinnik variations, etc., that are real tactical. So C takes D5 stops that right away. Okay, and unfortunately, on the black side, is that black has to be ready to defend for a long time without necessarily any chances of really winning. Not that he's in great trouble, but the game will take on, for lack of a better word, a type of boring game just due to the symmetrical nature of the position, and that leads to, uh, the next point is that black can try to break this symmetry by doing things like leaving the bishop on c8, for instance, instead of bringing the bishop out here, or playing systems like e6 and knight f6 to h5 when white's bishop comes to f4, which you'll see, and moves like a6 with the idea of an early bishop g4. And these odd moves are just to try to create an unbalance in the position from black's perspective, because black wants to try to win sometimes, depending on the tournament situation, what have you, and sometimes sometimes white is just going for a draw, and sometimes black doesn't want to draw. Black wants to try to win, so sometimes black will try to unbalance the position, and of course that creates more danger and risk for both sides. So the first game we're going to look at, and we're not going to look at the whole game, but it's just like a brief survey of what GMs are doing on both sides against this opening. We're going to look at Ivanchuk versus Nakamura. Ivanchuk having the white pieces, Nakamura with the black pieces. And this is from the Kings tournament in 2011, and both players were rated 2775 at the time. So we see, not ordinary players playing this opening. So it's definitely a opening that is played occasionally at the highest levels. So Ivanchuk plays knight c3. Of course, we had our Slav c takes, and then knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, knight c6 from Nakamura, and we see the symmetrical approach. Right? And some of you are like, boring. Bishop f4, bishop f5. Now this is basically the normal way you could play this. It's just maintaining the symmetry and gradually leading to a draw. But this position gets tricky already. For instance, after bishop f5, queen b3 can be played, which Ivanchuk played here, attacking this b pawn. And now black has two responses. One is knight a5, right? And the other is queen b6. Okay, now let's look at them real quick. If knight a5, then white can kind of force this bishop back behind the pawn chain, and I'll just show you how. So for instance, knight a5, queen a4 check. Of course, this guy's attacked. If queen d7, that would be a blunder. Of course, you don't want to do that. Okay, so that brings the bishop back behind the pawn chain, and then the queen slips back to c2, and notice how this diagonal is taken over. Not that it's a huge deal, but if you wanted to get your bishop out to f5, that kind of refutes the concept. Then of course black will continue with rook c8, etc. and then the game could go on like that. But that's something that you have to consider when you playing your bishop to f5 early. That it is possible for this line to take place. Now, if you're insisting on keeping your bishop out there, like Nakamura was, then you play move like Queen b6, which Nakamura played in the game. However, notice he's attacking this pawn right here. So Ivanchuk goes right into the ending, and there's something for Ivanchuk to work on now, which are these weak pawns on the b file. And again, players that play this opening is white. This is what they're looking for, just a little slight advantage, where black kind of has to, kind of struggle the whole game to try to just hold the position together. Okay. Again, rook b8 is not possible because the bishop is on f4. b6. This allows white to put undue pressure on the position. For instance, at the e4, just to illustrate, this knight being vulnerable allows the tactic of e4, and white is already better. For instance, after e takes f3, bishop takes c6, and white already has a major advantage. This is why queen b6 and knight a5 are pretty much the only alternatives here. So Nakamura opts for the bad pawn structure. e3, e6. Ivanchuk plays a3. Another interesting move here is knight h4, threatening to damage the pawn structure by capturing the bishop on f5. So the bishop either has to go back here or to e4, and white can win the bishop here. That's accumulating these small positional advantages. So Ivanchuk played a3, bishop e7, bishop e2, castle, rook fc8, and rook fc1. And again, we see that Nakamura is holding the position, but the position is dull, and white has slight weakness. And this is what I was saying earlier, is that basically the possibilities are reduced for black and white, right? And black just has to wait patiently for a long time. And we all know what style of player Nakamura is. He's not a patient player. He's not that kind of player. He likes to play, sharp, tactical openings where he has attacking possibilities. This is why he's King's Indian defense player. So Ivanchuk chose to exchange Slav to play against him, which is a great choice against a player like this. Knight h5. So Nakamura wants to ruin Ivanchuk's pawn structure. Ivanchuk steps to the side. Bishop takes g5, maybe f6. Maybe f6 was a little better. Bishop takes, knight takes, and there's an attack now, discovered attack from this bishop on this knight on h5. Knight steps back. Right, again, doesn't seem like too much to worry about. Bishop g4. And again, this is looking over the e5 square. That knight wants to jump to e5. So bishop takes. Bishop takes. And we could say here, again, black is not in serious danger, but the pressure is there lurking in the position. There's still there's minute chances, but it's only white that has the chances. Again, black is stuck in this defensive posture. Game continued on. Rook d8. He wants to keep the knight from coming there. You see these little annoying threats in the position. King f1. Now we see the king getting centralized. King f8. These are basic tenets in the endgame, centralizing the king. Now we see the doubling on the c file, right? And we see white's advantage just increasing ever so slightly, right? And patiently, as black kind of doesn't really have any ideas or prospects to improve. It's just he's kind of staying in the same spot where white is making slow but steady improvements in his position. You see the shuffle. So first the rook went to d8 to keep the knight from penetrating via d6. Nakamura brings his king to e7, which basically takes over the protection of d6, and now Nakamura shuffles his rook back to c8. King e1, king d7, h3, h5, h4. Notice fixing the pawn on the light square, same color as the bishop. See, these things add up. Notice right now how many pawns are on light squares, right? It doesn't seem like nothing now, but later on. And notice Ivanchuk's pawns are all on dark squares. Rook a5. Bishop comes out to e2. Knight e8. Of course, he wants to get rid of this knight. It's very annoying there. Rook b3. Rook d8. f3. And notice how the knight's possibilities are reduced by this move f3. Knight c3. The pawn was attacked by the rook. Now knight e2. Now black has to deal with these type of ideas. There it is, knight b4. Knight g7. But Ivanchuk is planning on bringing this knight here. Notice this guy's pinned. Rook ae8. And there it is. Knight e5. He can't capture here. And this pawn is threatened, which means the rook has to go into a passive situation. Bishop d3. And notice how Ivanchuk moved this bishop from where it was to even a better location. f5. More pressure on the c6 square. Rook g8. Bishop a4. See, this is all annoying if you're black, because you're not lost, but you're steadily, steadily being squeezed in a position. Bishop g4. Rook c2. Rook fd8. And that's why I say this is not a simple draw, this opening. And right here, we see Nakamura is in a lot of trouble. Right? These are two 2,700 players. They're almost 2,800. And we see that from a completely symmetrical, innocent-looking position, how white is built up practically a winning position here. Rook d6, b4, and now the threat of b5 compels the king to have to move now. So king b8, and now it's time to cash in. Bishop takes, b takes, and now what would you play here? Of course, b5, continuing to add on pressure. The pawn is fixed, right? For all intents and purposes, because if he goes to c5, and white just simply exchanges and wins a pawn. So this pawn is fixed for all intents and purposes. Okay? And now you might be asking, well, what about c takes b5? Well, this is tactically incorrect, because what happens is this knight is overworked. This knight is the only piece protecting g6 here. So after c takes, then simply rook takes, and knight takes g6, and we can see the black pawn structure is terrible. And then this knight will soon go to f4, hitting this. So that means the only way to defend that is to try to bring the rook onto, a rank where it can get back. But the problem is, then knight f4 happens. Anyway, okay. So c takes b5 is not an option. So he does king b7. And just Ivanchuk just crashes through. B takes e6 check, king f7. So he tries to blockade with the king. And now a4, rook d8, rook b2. Rook a8 from Nakamura, rook cb3. So he's willing to give this pawn up for this pawn. Knight c8. Now rook a2. Powerful move right here. a5, exploiting the fact that if he takes, the rook is coming right up here on the 7th rank. b5, so he gives up the pawn to play knight d6, and that way he can guard the b7 infiltration. Rook b4, but he's just forced to give up material. And rook a6 was played, and Ivanchuk moved his king over. H takes g5, and Ivanchuk went on to win. There's only a few more moves to go, so I'll just show you real quick. It's just a beautiful game by Ivanchuk. Now he's willing to jettison this pawn, of course. Rook a7 was played because if Nakamura knows that if rook takes a5, then the exchange sacrifice is in effect. And the threat right here is just devastating to capture this rook. And there's really nothing that he can do there. So rook a7, rook b6, rook h8. Just snatches off a pawn there. a6. Nothing to do but go back and forth. And he gives up the exchange. And this is an easy win, or easy win for Ivanchuk. And Nakamura resigned here. There's really nothing that he can do in this position. Okay, so he gave it up. All right, so that should give you like a brief overview. That was a long game, but I just wanted you to see the the progress in the position. That the position looks so drawerish and simple, but this is the type of this is exactly what White is looking for in the Slav. There's these type of positions. Just to create that little bit of early damage in the pawn structure, and then just slowly squeeze black, who had no counterplay or possibilities, the whole entire game. And this says a lot about the game, because we know Nakamura is definitely a very, very strong and tactically alert player, and even he was not able to generate one real legitimate threat out of the position from the black side. This lets me know that the exchange Slav is definitely something that has to be prepared for if you're a player of the white pieces. This also um, gives me the feeling that bishop f5, although it seems very natural, um, it's definitely may not be the best move here in light of queen b3. You know, maybe queen b6 for black might be better. Not allowing that situation, okay? Or maybe even a waiting move like g6 or something like that. Let's see what the grandmasters play though. Forget about what I'm saying right here. Let's look at something else. But I wanted to show you that game so you could see a model game of what white is trying to do there. Here is another example in the same line. Of course, I'm not going to go through the whole game, but I want to let you know that most of the Grandmaster games that you'll see, Grandmaster approach to this is that many of them do play bishop f5, but after queen b3, the main thing that's played is knight a5. Okay, and this game is Ivan Sokolov with the white pieces against David Navarra with the black pieces. And this game took place in the French Championship in 2014. And this is the line I had showed you in analysis to the Ivanchuk Nakamura game. Knight a5 with the idea that you hit the queen, but by driving this queen away, you kind of force this bishop inside the pawn chain. And this seems like an adequate solution. But like I said, instead of bringing the bishop out, there's other alternatives, and I'll show them to you. The one I like is queen b6, attacking this pawn. Now the idea is not so much to win this pawn, of course, but it does create this threat here. After queen c2, you can't play a move like knight b3 here. Knight b4, and then bring your bishop out. Say knight. It gets real sharp. Knight a4, queen a5. Now his bishop has to come back. And after knight c2, bishop takes c2, bishop takes a5, and bishop takes a4. You have the symmetry here. And again, it's very drawish, but now black has nothing to worry about at all. That's just an example in my own analysis. But I'm going to show you other ways that grandmasters deal with this opening. And here's, like I said, most of the time after queen b3, you'll see knight a5. Notice the queen is attacked, pawn is protected. Queen a4, bishop d7, and now the queen shoots back. Navarra played e6. Okay, so that's the concession he was willing to make, is placing his bishop back in the chain. e3, bishop e7. And again, this falls into the idea where I was saying that sometimes black wants to break the symmetry. And this gives, black a chance of outplaying his opponent if he wants to try to play for a victory. Bishop d3, knight goes back, and now of course he's not just wasting time here, but he has the idea of playing knight b4. So a3 is played. Knight h5 is another common idea, trying to just exploit the fact that the bishop is on f4 and win the bishop at times. Bishop e5, f6, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back. And now this pawn is attacked. So f5 is played. Bishop jumps back. Castle. h3, and white's playing his to try to boldly attack on the king's side. Now we have this stonewall set up. Knight f6. Sokolov went for g4, and Navarro played a good move, just jumped in the center after g takes. Rook takes, which again is dangerous, but he's breaking the symmetry. I think that maybe just knight takes c3 here, and if bishop takes, this e takes. Looks good to me. But g takes and rook takes. F5 was good enough. Bishop takes, e takes, queen takes, and queen b6 was played. b4, rook a f8. And black had enough play in that game where he was able to secure a draw here in this position. But we can see that it's a little more dynamic and a little more possibilities are created for both sides, and this was black's idea. Most of the time, what you'll see after this bishop f5 idea, if white is just playing for a draw, is e3, e6, you'll see the continued symmetry in the position and just these massive trades. And this is what sometimes the black players expect. And you see this massive trade of pieces. And this is from a game between Nikita Vichugov and Evgeny Tomashevsky. It's a blitz game, actually. And this game ended in a draw. And this is what players with the white pieces trying to draw will usually allows this, after f5, instead of getting enterprising, trying to play moves like queen b3, as we saw Ivanchuk do, they'll just fall in line with this type of concept, just trading off everything. And if you're black and trying to win, this is no good, especially if you need a win in the last round or something. This is no good to have these, massive trades. So this leads to the next point, is what black tries to do to, again, create a more dynamic game in position. One more game in this line, or related to this line, I wanted to show you. Here's Morozevich versus Alexander Morozevich with the white pieces versus Artemiev, rated 2662, the black pieces, and this is from 2014. So we see the same symmetrical setup, but instead of the bishop d3 and followed by massive trades, now Morozevich inserted queen b3, which has the same ideas, except that here black played bishop b4. Again, I'm not a big fan of this idea of getting this pawn structure, because we saw in the Nakamura game that with great patience, white can steadily build up his position where black is stuck in a defensive mode right here. And now here, knight a5 doesn't work, and you should be able to see that in this position, the main difference here is that this bishop, after e6 has been played, this bishop can no longer return. Okay, so here it's a mistake, and this is one of the reasons why Grandmasters will delay that move. So be aware when you're playing. Okay, so for instance here, again, line we just discussed, the queen b3 at this point, immediately challenging this pawn, then knight a5, queen a4, and bishop d7, right, is one of the main lines. However, in this particular game, Morozevich just continued his development, e3. And then after e6, the bishop's retreating on f5 is cut off, so you can't get back, right? And I showed you one of these games where if white really wants to draw, he just plays bishop d3 and then a bunch of trades, you know, etc., etc. But here, Morozevich had a trick up his sleeve. He played queen b3 now. So here, Artemiev played a good move, bishop b4, right, which blocks the queen from attacking here and develops a piece. So knight e5 was played, and now queen b6 was played, okay? And now we see the imbalance in the position created. Bishop takes c6. So far, so good. White now has a target here on c6, on the c file, right, to the c pawn. So it's something black has to keep in mind now. Bishop e2, knight e4, putting more pressure on the c pawn. Now, maybe just castle here, you know, the weight issues. Black tries to press the issue here. And I'm not really a fan of this move here because it strengthens the white center. It helps him strengthen by playing f3. Now, what it does for black, and I can see why black chose this, is that in bringing the b pawn to the c file, it closes up the c file. So now this pawn is no longer a real weakness for black by bringing this symmetrical pawn. The downside is that it does kind of strengthen the center for white here, but nevertheless, black should be a-okay. Bishop e7, Morozevich castles from black, and now Morozevich plays c4, so he puts some pressure on the black center. And now I feel this is a mistake from black. Actually, not this. I'm sorry. This I don't feel is a real mistake. I mean, it's a symmetrical position, and he attacks white center also. So c takes d4, right? And black plays e takes d5, and this is what I think is a mistake right here. Because after queen takes d5, white picks up a pawn and he's attacking this guy at the same time. And this idea of bishop e6, c takes d4, e takes d4, and bishop f6, and this is black's idea, it seems to fall a bit short of the mark. Okay, and we see the idea that black initiated all of this with the idea of winning that pawn back. But we see that somehow Morozevich is able to hold on to the pawn. We see this great battle happen. You see, so now black has to spend all his resources trying to get that pawn. And so he finally gets the pawn, the D pawn, but he loses the A pawn, so he's still down the pawn. So it didn't work out. Black's plan didn't work out here. And again, Morozevich in this position went on to win with that extra pawn. However, we can't blame that on the opening, but he did, you know, he went for a play. He basically miscalculated the black player here. But again, it just shows you the possibilities that are involved in these positions. Okay. So maybe instead of going for e takes d5, perhaps c takes d5. But this hitting its bishop, it might be a little dangerous for black here. Of course, he can't capture because of queen takes. That forces this, and this has to be better for white. See, so it gets real dangerous quickly. Okay, so black definitely has to be careful. So to me, this whole concept with knight e4 was a bit premature. Maybe castle, and just waiting is a little better here. So hopefully you've seen by now that these positions after bishop f4 and bishop f5 for white, and excuse me, for black, are in as simple and straightforward as they seem. That it's possible for black to get in a lot of hot water. Okay, so black has tried alternatives again to break the symmetry and avoid getting into those positions that might rise after bishop f4 and bishop f5. Like I said, personally, I like to move instead of bringing the bishop out to f5. Um, I like queen b6 right away. And if bishop f5 and queen b3 right away, I think knight a5 is a good move. But then at the same time, you have to look out for this move e3, which kind of negates the idea, right? Because if you play e6 now, then queen b3 can be played. Not that it's any of these moves are winning, but you have to be um, aware of the little positional nuances and annoyances from black. And this is again from that game we looked at in the Morozevich game. So black has tried other moves. One of them is e6, just shutting in the bishop. So just basically foregoing this idea, and the position kind of takes on this character of like a kind of Queen's Gambit now. And this is played uh, between Ivan Sokolov, who's 2650, and versus one of the probably the top Slav player in the world, a Slav expert in the world is Alexei Dreyev. And Dreyev played the move e6, which avoids all those complications with queen b3, etc. So let's see how that went. So Sokolov played e3, all natural moves, often in quick trade. Bishop d6. Sokolov says no trade. Now you have queen b6, attacking the b pawn and inviting white to just double up the pawns on the king side. Queen b3, queen takes, a takes b3, and we see the reverse situation now with white having the suspect pawns on the b file. The positive, if you want to see one, is the a file is opened up. Many times black winds up playing a6 at some point to free the rook on a8. Okay, and this is not a big deal. Both sides have some pawn weaknesses. Black has the bishop here, and now black can use this open file with his rooks on, and he can use the f pawn too to help control e4, which he does. So you got like a kind of stonewall situation, and then also the bonus too is pieces are kept off of e5 because black always will have this up his sleeve. So rook fc1, rook hc8, G3, knight B4, excellent blockading piece, exploiting the weakness of this these double pawns. Knight E1, A6, and of course, as soon as A6 is done, then the B6 square is a little weakened, but had to be done in order to keep this from happening. And this game ended up being a draw with this idea E6 from Sokolov, excuse me, from Alexei Dreyev. Another idea seen in the game between Levon Aronian, who was 28-15 at the time, and versus Victor Lasnica, who was 26-79. This is from a blitz game, but again, we're not getting into detail, but just to show you the ideas. Again, Dreyev had played E6. Another idea is A6. Of course, A6 still leaves the possibility of the bishop coming out to F5, which is one of the main things you want in the Slav. And one of the main reasons why people play the Slav is to have the bishop be able to come out. So what's the deal with A6? Well, A6 is, I could brush it off and say, like some commentators, oh, that's a high class waiting move. That really doesn't give you any information, like why is the move is being, it just sounds like, good to say that. So high class waiting move. See what white is going to do, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, that's partly true, but there's some ideas behind it. Remember in the other line that I showed you that when black brings the bishop out to F5, hold on, then queen B3 can be played, and then you have this whole idea with knight A5, queen E4 check. The bishop is forced to come back, and then queen C2 retaking the diagonal, or taking over the diagonal from B1 to H7, right? Remember that line. Now, this is what A6 does. So A6 gives black the added opportunity to play B5 instead. So let's say, for instance, now let's just make a move, rook C1, and now bishop F5. Now let's just say, of course, white doesn't have to do this, but let's just say queen B3. Now he could do it. The queen after knight A5, queen B3, and now the bishop is not compelled to come back. Now B5 can be played. So now there's no queen C2 because the bishop is there on F5. So now queen D1. So it's just a little subtlety in the position. And then of course black has, a good game. You play E6 and then continue on from there. So it looks like a nice square too for the knight. Of course he would have to play B3, but then weaken this a little bit. Weaken the C3 square. Okay, so that's some of the ideas behind A6. And in the game, Aronian played rook C1, bishop F5, and of course he didn't play the move queen B3 there because he knows that it's not as effective. Instead, he just went on about his business and played E3. Rook C8 was played, bishop E2, E6, castle, bishop D6, and Aronian went on to win this game. But like I said, it was a blitz game, and but this position that could be considered pretty equal here. Okay. Another example in the line A6 is from the game Morozevich versus How. This took place in 2012. So after rook C1, bishop F5. Remember I told you that pretty much the queen B3 idea is not really effective here. E3, rook C8, bishop E2, E6, and after series of exchanges, How was able to draw easily. Notice too, you might see this a lot, is this this attack against the C5 square, and white has to always be, excuse me, black has to be on point to just make sure that he keeps an eye on white's possibilities there. And we see him trying to build up this outpost with B4 and this effective strategy of just attacking the outpost. And this game also ended up being a draw. Again, for the enterprising player with the black pieces, again, A6 is a good move to try to trip things up and unbalance the position. Here's an extreme example. This game was between Peter Hein Nielsen and Ernesto Inarkiev, and this was from 2012, the Turkish Bank Chess League. And after A6, Nielsen played Rook C1. And at this point, we're familiar with Bishop F5 coming out, right? That's one of the ideas. And I told you behind to make that a little bit easier for black. And I think it's probably the best move here after Rook C1. However, there's other ideas. Remember, I told you that sometimes black wants to fight, so we don't know the condition, the tournament conditions here. Maybe Anarkiev needed a win or just was in a fighting mood. Okay, so here he played knight h5, which is possible. But again, when you play moves like this, you remember there's chances open up for both sides. So you're taking the chance, and you're kind of putting your opponent, in the position too to where he's taking chances. So the game, becomes more risky. So after knight h5, attacking the bishop, bishop e5, f6, and this is real. This is real like committal chess right here. So f6, e5, the real uncompromising play by Anarkiev. e3, you grab the bishop. H takes g3. Bishop e6, bishop e2, bishop e7. Both sides castled, and now things look a little more normal here. Knight a4 again. Remember I told you about this attack on c5, and with b6 being weak after a6 is played, this is a common idea. Rook c8, a3, bishop d6, knight c5. We got to get that guy out of there, so he exchanges. Rook takes, right? Takes with a piece. Queen d6, b4. So we see that although white has the c5 square, a good outpost for the rook, that black has decent representation in the center. So e4, knight d2, b6, get out of there. Rook c1, and there's the attack against the center. b5, just simply knight e7. So he takes, knight takes. And that game ended up being a draw. But I wanted to show you that as another alternative to just bring the bishop out to f5. But again, this is more risky, as it seems. All right, I wanted to show you the final idea with this move, a6, that I would like to discuss. And then I think afterwards I can go on to my conclusion. And that is that Morozevich played against a game against Mamedov, okay, with the black pieces here. And this is a rapid game in 2012. And he came with this idea, instead of just playing, this regular move like rook c1 and bishop f5 coming out, he played this knight immediately to e5, which is doesn't look too threatening, But it's an interesting idea here. Now Mamadarev played Bishop D7, and he did it in 2 games, and he wound up losing. Again, this is now where you want your bishop at. You know, usually in the Slav, you want to get it out the pawn chain, play Bishop F5. But what I think that Mamadarev was worried about was this idea that if he brings his bishop out to F5, that Morozevich will simply just take here. Knight takes C6, B takes C6, and bringing this pawn to the open C file, and then follow up with Rook C1 and just try and put pressure on this pawn. For instance, I don't know, Queen A4, Queen B6. Let's ignore that for now. Let's see what happens here. Queen takes. Yeah, that's wrong. Can you see it? Check. Pick up the rook. Instincts don't fail me. So E3 here. E6. Bishop E2. Bishop E7. Castle. And maybe more like B3. And with trying to put pressure on this pawn. The only problem I see with that plan is that eventually black can just play C5 here, which gets rid of the pawn. So maybe trying to think of another idea. So after Queen A4, of course not that. E6. Maybe instead of B3, can you play this? That doesn't look right to me. Queen takes. Okay, you got a thread here, so A5. Can you get away with this? Yeah, that's the idea. I think I stumbled on. Okay, and the Rook FC1 with pressure, and that's a basic idea. Like I just threw some kind of random moves together, but this is kind of like the basic idea is to put pressure on these pawns. But black at the same time have pressure against these 2 pawns. So I look at the game as pretty much equal here. But I think that's what Mamadarev was worried about, was this idea. If he just goes like that, then he has to deal with this backward pawn on the open C file. Therefore, he tried to play Bishop D7, and this puts him in a little bit, again, there's a little imbalance in the position, but black is in a passive position that he probably doesn't want to be in. Again, Mamadarev is in that style of Nakamura, aggressive, tactical chess, and this type of position isn't really his cup of tea here. And this position is not too bad for black, but again, it's a little, not really too much to do. And again, this doesn't fit Mamadarev's style. Morozevich has a nice little Pillsbury position with the knight on E5, kind of like a stone wall, and it's easy to play for white. Now Mamadarev sets up a reverse stone wall, which allows a knight to come into G6. And usually reverse stone wall is good for white. And from this position, eventually, Mamadarev wind up losing the game. That knight is going to E5, of course. And the position was equal, but again, he got into like a passive position, and just wind up steadily going downhill in the position. Right here, it's equal, but he just allowed Morozevich to outplay him. But I just want to share that idea with you of A6 and knight E5, and with this idea of creating this weakness on the C file after um, knight takes C, bishop F5, knight takes C6. Okay, so here is the conclusion. The conclusion, as you might have noticed, is that the exchange Slav is not as boring and is not as easy to play for both sides as it might seem. It can be a dangerous weapon, and there's some tricky move orders. Black can quickly get into a passive position and just gradually be ground and outplayed if he's not careful. However, there are antidotes, and Black can achieve equality, but he just has to keep his eyes open and be careful. As they lines like I said with A6 and E6 without bringing the bishop to F5 if Black wants to try to mix it up a little. But for the most part, most grandmasters are gonna play the line with bishop F4, bishop F5, and so afterward, be prepared for queen B3. Which knight A5 is the probably the most principal response and the one that you'll see most. Not queen B6, as you saw in the Nakamura Ivanchuk Nakamura game. Although it is playable, it's creates more difficulties that you have to deal with Black. And besides queen B3, you also see the move E3, right? And then A6, and then again at that point you have to think about Morozevich's move queen B3 at this point. But again, that can be met by bishop B4. But a great majority of players will run into bishop D3, queen takes, bishop D6, queen takes D6, and castle with the completely drawn game. So if you need to win, you might not want to play um, the Slav because you might run into a player that only needs a draw and he'll play an exchange Slav against you. And if the Slav is the only opening you have, or your main opening is Black against D4 or C4 rather, then you'll have to take some chances and try to mix it up. So for instance, after bishop F4, you had these ideas like knight H4, A6, E6, etc. So I hope you learned something about the exchange Slav. So it's interesting opening for both sides. And as usual, please subscribe to the channel and like and comment. And I'll catch you on the next video.